Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tearing open a classic text that, often sits unread on school shelves. But when you actually approach it with fresh eyes, it feels less like academic literature and more like a radical manifesto, really. One designed to completely dismantle your daily routine.
It really is.
We are diving deep into Henry David Thoreau's Walden, or Life in the Woods, which was published way back in 1854.
And what a remarkable document it is. I mean, on the surface, it chronicles the 2 years and 2 months he spent living in a cabin he built himself near Walden Pond.
Right, in Concord, Massachusetts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that. Fundamentally, it's this uncompromising philosophical quest. So our mission today is to really unpack this foundational text of American self-reliance, but not as some dusty piece of history.
No, not at all.
We want to treat it as a surprisingly relevant, maybe even necessary handbook for what he called living deliberately.
And the genius of Walden, for me at least, isn't just the retreat into the woods. It's the intense, almost scientific rigor he applied to the whole experiment. The entire book is just driven by this burning, singular purpose to get past all the cultural noise, past the expectations, and just find out what life actually is when you reduce it to its essential facts.
Precisely. He was absolutely determined to confront what he called the essential facts of life and to reduce the entire act of existing down to its lowest terms. He wanted to prove, really, using his own body and his own mind as the laboratory,
Yeah, like a lab.
whether life was inherently mean and miserable or if it was sublime. And he was not interested in being subtle about what he found.
Oh, not at all. He sets the stage so perfectly by saying his goal was to brag as lustily as Chanticleer in the morning, standing on his roost, if only to wake his neighbors up.
I love that line.
Fantastic. He's not writing for some abstract future generation or, people across the ocean. He's writing explicitly to the very people who would be reading the book in 1854 New England.
His overburdened, anxious townsmen.
Yes.
It's basically an indictment disguised as an autobiography. Thoreau starts by looking at the general condition of his fellow humans and just asks a very simple question. Why are they so profoundly miserable?
And that's where we're going to start. Let's unpack this intense and surprisingly blunt critique of the common condition of his neighbors.
It's brutal.
Thoreau's initial assessment really is brutal. He sees his contemporaries as being trapped in this state of perpetual and often, completely pointless labor. He frames it immediately as a form of suffering. He calls it the universal penance.
He says he sees the inhabitants everywhere, in shops, in offices, in the fields, doing penance in 1,000 remarkable ways. And the distinction he makes is so crucial.
What's that?
This labor is often without end. That's the key. It's an exhausting, self-imposed kind of servitude.
He uses these incredible classical and religious analogies to really drive the point home, which, the Harvard man in him just loved to do.
Absolutely.
He says, the labor of a New Englander is far more astonishing than the conscious penances that are practiced by the Brahmins of India. The ones who sit exposed to 4 fires or hang suspended over flames.
And his reasoning is so sharp. Why is the Yankees' labor more astonishing? Because the Brahmins' extreme practice, however painful it is finite. It has a spiritual end goal. Once it's accomplished, the penance is over.
Right.
Done. But the labor of the average townsman is compared unfavorably even to the 12 labors of Hercules. And why? Because Hercules completed his tasks. He finished. Thoreau's neighbors just keep going. They crush one obligation only to have 2 more spring up in its place. There's just no end to the demands of their life.
You could argue the modern equivalent isn't just, working a long week. It's the total impossibility of ever achieving economic or personal equilibrium.
It's the hamster wheel.
It's the hamster wheel. We solve one debt, then we take on a bigger one. We finish a project, and then we find the next 3 are demanding our attention. It's this constant, endless war against what he calls the hydra of obligations.
And he even notes they have no friend Iolaus to come and burn the root of the hydra's head so it doesn't spring back. They're on their own.
They're completely on their own. And he observes that this whole cycle often begins not by some adult choice, but at birth. He expresses this profound pity for young men who inherit not freedom, but these massive established burdens.
The large farms, the extensive houses, the big barns.
Exactly. He describes them as pushing before them a barn 75 feet by 40 and 100 acres of land. They don't own the property owns them. They are, in his words, serfs of the soil.
Which is such a fundamental challenge to the entire concept of inherited wealth, or that whole American dream of independence through land ownership.
He's flipping it on its head.
Completely. He's saying that rather than being born free, you were born a debtor to a massive existing infrastructure that you then must perpetually maintain for the rest of your life.
Which brings us directly to his famous critique of the tyranny of the house and of possessions in general. These huge traditional houses become, what does he call them? Unwieldy property.
Yes. Property that often imprisons the owner rather than providing shelter or freedom.
And he brings in another classical reference here to just hammer home this need for mobility and simplicity. He reminds us of Momus's objection to the house that was built by the goddess Minerva.
Right, that it wasn't movable.
Exactly. The house, in Momus's view, couldn't escape the evils that were likely to be perpetrated in it. And Thoreau saw that lack of movability as the ultimate lack of freedom.
If you can't easily relocate, you are tethered, and you're often tethered to debt. He argues that men are needlessly poor all their lives because they feel this compulsion to have a house just like their neighbors.
The poverty of conformity.
That's it. It's not a poverty of necessity. It's the poverty of conformity. And it forces them into all these superfluous expenses, right?
Maintaining those houses means you have to have empty guest chambers for empty guests. I mean, the conformity dictates the luxury, and then the luxury dictates the endless labor.
And that's where the burden lies. The external structure dictates the internal commitment. This is probably best exemplified in his famous and frankly pretty amusing dusting problem.
Ah, yes. The 3 pieces of limestone.
Just 3 pieces of smooth, expensive limestone on his desk, hardly a collection, but he was horrified to realize they required daily dusting.
This physical obligation was just consuming his mental bandwidth when, as he says, the furniture of my mind was all undusted still.
So he threw them out the window in disgust.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just about housekeeping. It's such a powerful, metaphorical articulation of the core danger. Men become the tools of their tools.
See more about that. Tools of their tools.
Well, we acquire technology or possessions, supposedly to simplify life. But those objects immediately demand maintenance, updates, cleaning, storage. They demand our time and our attention. And they ultimately end up enslaving the owner.
If Thoreau were alive today, this concept would be his primary diagnosis of modern anxiety. I mean, what is the smartphone? It's a device meant to simplify communication, but now it demands constant software updates, charging, our attention, security protocols. It just drains us mentally.
It creates a perpetual maintenance loop. And Thoreau saw that the effect of contemporary art and culture was just to make this state of servitude comfortable.
Right, to paper over it.
Exactly. He says the best works of art express man's struggle to free himself, but the culture of his time only makes this low state comfortable, allowing us to settle down on earth and just forget heaven.
Meaning we use entertainment or, superficial aesthetics to mask the underlying existential dread or dissatisfaction with how our lives are structured. We don't need radical change. We just need a prettier, more comfortable cage.
That's it perfectly. Before we can adorn our houses with fine art, Thoreau suggests we have to strip the walls, strip our lives, and lay the foundations in beautiful, deliberate living, not in relentless accumulation.
And this skepticism, it extends beyond just physical possessions. It goes right into the realm of intellectual conformity, particularly the advice of elders. He is so radically contrarian about tradition.
He states it plainly, no way of thinking or doing, however ancient, can be trusted without proof. That's the scientific method applied to morality and lifestyle. He's openly challenging that knee-jerk reverence for received wisdom.
It's a bold stance for his time, almost revolutionary. He argues that age is hardly so well qualified for an instructor as youth because old people's lives have often been miserable failures for private reasons.
And he famously claimed he had yet to hear the first syllable of valuable or even earnest advice from my seniors.
Which sounds so arrogant on the surface.
It does, but it's not simply a disrespectful rejection of age. It's a rejection of experience that has led to inertia or misery. He's arguing that their partial failures don't provide a useful blueprint for the young who have to embark on their own life experiments.
So if the consensus advice leads to this universal penance, then that advice has to be discarded.
It has to be.
The ultimate takeaway here is the value of this perpetual, ongoing revolution in your own life. We have to be open to radical change because, as he says, all change is a miracle to contemplate, but it is a miracle which is taking place every instant. The incessant anxiety of the world is only cured, he believes, by denying that change is impossible.
And that realization is precisely what drove him to the woods. He had to demonstrate the possibility of this miracle. He needed to prove that a different way of life, simpler, less anxious, less burdened, was not only philosophically sound, but economically viable.
And he gives us the spreadsheet.
He literally does.
This is where Walden becomes so unique among philosophical works. Thoreau doesn't just theorize. He provides this detailed accounting. He literally shows us the receipts for his life change, starting with the construction of his lodge in March of 1845.
He describes the labor with such pride. He borrowed an axe, and makes a point of saying he returned it sharper than I received it, and went down to the woods, cutting white pines for timber.
He used a narrow axe for hewing the main timbers, the rafters, and the studs. He saw this self-reliance in construction as a deeply moral act.
He did. He said the timbers were mortised or tenoned by their stump. By refusing to rely on that complex division of labor that he sees enslaving his neighbors, he argues that if men constructed dwellings with their own hands and provided food simply, the poetic faculty would be universally developed.
So he's arguing that the physical act of creation, building your own shelter, securing your own food, is itself a kind of spiritual discipline. It connects you directly to the earth and to your own self-worth.
It develops the soul alongside the biceps.
Right, but the acquisition of materials, that provides one of the most vivid and human anecdotes in the whole book. How he got his boards. He essentially outsourced a tiny part of his supply chain by buying a pre-existing structure.
Yes, he bought and dismantled the shanty of James Collins, who was an Irish immigrant who worked on the Fitchburg Railroad. He paid $4.25 for it. And the story is just loaded with irony.
So the James Collins shanty was fine. It was small, peaked cottage roof. But their living conditions were just chaotic. Mrs. Collins shows him inside, and she's pointing out the good boards overhead.
And he notes the window, which was originally 2 whole panes of glass, but the cat had recently passed out through one of them, shattering it.
And their possessions perfectly illustrate the superficiality that Thoreau critiques. They had basic essentials, a stove, a bed, a baby, but they also had a silk parasol, a gilt-framed looking glass, and a patent new coffee mill nailed to an oak sapling.
It shows that even the very poor felt that pull of unnecessary consumption and conformity.
And the cat, which is sort of symbolic of these unnecessary domestic burdens, took to the woods when the house was dismantled, only to meet a sad end in a woodchuck trap.
Thoreau concluded the bargain swiftly for $4.25, with James Collins promising he'd vacate by 5 a.m. the next morning. Thoreau took the entire shanty down that same day, drew the nails, and spread the boards on the grass to bleach, ready for his own use.
This is the practical application of his philosophy. Reuse, reduce, simplify. He also dug his own cellar, 6 feet square by 7 feet deep, down to fine sand. And he based the dimensions on a woodchuck's burrow. He took particular pleasure, he says, in the breaking of ground.
Establishing a connection to the very foundations of his land.
And the timing of when he moved in is equally symbolic. He occupied the house, a modest 10 by 15-foot structure, on July 4th, 1845.
Independence Day.
The celebration of American independence. He immediately secured his personal freedom, and he spent the rest of that summer finishing the chimney and shingling the sides.
Okay, now let's get to the radical part. The numbers. This is what floors people.
It is. The total expense for the house materials, with labor excluded since he did it himself, was $28.12. An astonishing figure.
It truly is. In today's terms, if you adjust for inflation and relative labor costs, building a decent functional shelter for less than $30 might be equivalent to doing it for under, say, $3,000 today. And that's a conservative estimate.
He proved that housing debt, which traps so many of us, is a burden of choice and conformity, not a necessity for shelter.
And he didn't stop there. He meticulously detailed his total expenditures for the first 8 months he was there, from July 4th to March 1st. His total outgoes were incredibly low, $61.9934.
And when you break that down, it shows where he focused his austerity. So farm expenses implements, seed, a plowing team that was $14.72. Clothing and incidentals were $8.44. The food cost. The food cost is where the radicality just shines through.
His total food cost for those 8 months was just $8.74.
$8.74. That's about 27 cents a week. We spend more than that on a single cup of coffee today.
And the main staples were incredibly simple: rice, molasses, rye meal, and Indian meal. And then there's that subtle, telling detail in the accounting.
The pork.
He lists pork at 22 cents, but it's listed under the header. All experiments which failed. this wasn't just budgetary, it was philosophical. He was connecting his economy to a commitment to a pure vegetable diet.
And he wasn't starving or just sitting around. He was actively earning. He cultivated about 2.5 acres, mostly beans. His farm income totaled $23.44. Plus, he earned another $13.34 from day labor, doing things like surveying and carpentry.
So total income, $36.78. Subtract that from his $61.34 expenses, and he had a net deficit of only $25.34. But here's the magnificent realization.
Go on.
He secured leisure and independence and health and a comfortable house for the mere cost of $25 and about 2 months of part-time labor. His labor was purposeful and minimal.
He famously said that maintaining oneself on this earth is not a hardship but a pastime, provided we live simply and wisely. That treadmill of constant work is self-inflicted.
And part of that self-inflicted misery, he discovered, was diet. His focus on simple, natural food was intense. He experimented with bread making. He consulted ancient authorities.
He accidentally scalded his yeast.
He did, and found it was not indispensable. He realized that Cato's ancient Roman recipe, panem depsticium sic facito, omitted leaven entirely.
He was so proud to omit the trivialness of carrying a bottle full of yeast around. It sounds like such a small thing, but it represents discarding all these unnecessary complications that society has layered onto simple acts.
And this leads him to his moral argument for vegetarianism. He believes that eating animals is a miserable way, and that it is the ultimate destiny of humanity to leave off eating animals, just as, historically, savage tribes left off eating each other.
He extends this extreme purity to drinks as well. Water is the only drink for a wise man. He warns that wine, coffee, and tea are intoxicating and may destroy nations, just as they destroyed Greece and Rome. He asks, why would you dash the hopes of a morning with warm coffee?
It's a chemical dependency that dulls the senses you need for deliberate living.
And all of this is synthesized in his famous anecdote about his neighbor, Farmer John Field. Thoreau juxtaposed his own light labor lifestyle with Field's life of hard bog hoeing.
Poor John Field. He had to work incredibly hard to afford the very things Thoreau found superfluous: the tea, the coffee, the meat. And then he had to work hard again to repair the physical waste caused by his hard labor and hard food.
It's a treadmill.
It is. Thoreau concluded it was as broad as it was long. Indeed, it was broader than it was long, for he was discontented and wasted his life into the bargain. Field, for all his industry, lacked the arithmetic for simplicity.
He didn't know how to calculate his true freedom cost.
No. He saw effort as the only moral virtue, rather than questioning the necessity of the effort itself.
Which means the entire experiment of Walden wasn't about dropping out of society. It was about doing the math. It was about defining the true cost of independence.
And this dedication to radical simplicity inevitably led him to critique the great symbols of modern technological progress. Primarily the railroad, which passed close enough to his cabin that he could hear it and see the men working on it.
And he was so profoundly skeptical of the promise of speed and convenience. This is where he offers one of his most famous thought experiments, dealing with the travel time to Fitchburg, which was about 30 miles away.
He says the fare is 90 cents, which was almost a day's wages for a common laborer at the time. If his friend insists on riding the train, he has to first work the rest of the day to earn the 90 cents, so he arrives sometime tomorrow.
But if Thoreau starts on foot right now,
he gets there tonight.
The economic trap is just immediate. The perceived convenience requires so much antecedent labor and material dependence that it completely negates the benefit. Thus, as he says, the swiftest traveler is he that goes afoot.
And then there's that incredible, haunting metaphor he uses for the railroad itself. He says chillingly, "We do not ride on the railroad, it rides upon us."
That is such a powerful reversal. If you apply that today, we don't use the app uses us. We don't employ the platform employs our attention, our data, our labor.
He makes this concrete by talking about the sleepers, the railroad ties upon which the rails are laid and covered with sand. These sleepers, he says, are men. They're Irishmen or Yankee men upon whom society runs. The system literally rests on human lives being ground down.
And he calls attention to the cruelty of the system. When the railroad runs over a man walking in his sleep, a supernumerary sleeper in the wrong position, he calls it. They made this huge hue and cry about the accident, as if it were a rare exception.
When, in reality, the entire structure is built upon the suffering and exploitation of men who sacrifice their rest and their security.
His critique of communication technology is just as relevant today as it was then. He saw modern inventions as merely pretty toys that distracted us from the true end of life.
The magnetic telegraph is his main target. Why are we in such a haste, he asks, to construct a line from Maine to Texas when the states might have nothing important to communicate?
The genius of that critique is that the issue isn't the ability to communicate fast, it's whether we have anything sensible or important to say in the first place.
He jokes that the first news to leak through will be that the Princess Adelaide has the whooping cough.
If you just plug that into a modern context, that is a direct critique of the 24/7 news cycle and social media feeds. They prioritize the trivial over the significant, the sensational gossip over the enduring truth.
He dismisses newspapers and the post office as just gossip, suggesting a clever person could write the foreign news a year in advance with perfect accuracy because nothing truly new or important ever seems to make the headlines.
For instance, Spain. He suggests you just throw in Don Carlos and the Infanta, Seville, and a bullfight, and you're pretty much true to the letter. It's a cynical but often accurate assessment of media's predictable structure.
Now, despite all these harsh critiques of speed and mindless consumption, it's really important to note that Thoreau held a deeply nuanced, almost contradictory admiration for the sheer human effort that drove global exchange.
He admired the enterprise and bravery of commerce itself. He says he is less affected by the heroism of soldiers at, say, Buena Vista than by the steady, cheerful valor of the men who inhabit the snowplow.
The 3 o'clock in the morning courage.
Yes. That requires genuine, constructive bravery.
He found a certain beauty and intellectual stimulation in the freight train itself. When the cars rattled past him, he could smell the exotic goods, the salt fish, manila hemp, Spanish hides, and he noted the hides still preserved their twist and angle, a type of constitutional obstinacy. He felt more like a citizen of the world when the external world arrived at his woodpile.
But he noted the irony of the exchange. Up comes raw cotton, down goes woven cloth. Up come books, but down goes the wit that writes them. He respects the raw effort and the products of nature, but the moment they get packaged and commodified, their spiritual value declines.
So his bottom line seems to be that human enterprise, when it's focused on the essentials of life, is admirable. But when that enterprise is diverted to superficial ends-fast gossip and superfluous luxury, it becomes self-defeating, and it ultimately rides upon the men who sustain it.
Which means the whole point of simplifying the external life is to create room for the internal life. And that brings us to the quiet reward of his experiment, finding true solitude.
The Walden experiment really does hinge on this idea that external simplification creates necessary internal space and focus. He absolutely champions solitude, but he radically redefines it. He turns it from isolation into a profound kind of presence.
He famously states, "I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." But isn't that deeply impractical? I mean, doesn't the human soul require society to thrive?
Thoreau would argue that the kind of society most people experience is actively detrimental to the soul. For him, company is often wearisome and dissipating. And why? Because society is commonly too cheap.
We meet too often, he says, having not acquired any new value for each other. He compares us to old, musty cheese.
And he emphasizes that true solitude is internal and intellectual, not geographical. He points out that even the crowded halls of Cambridge College are as solitary as a dervish in the desert because a man thinking or working is always alone.
The critical question for him isn't how far apart we dwell physically, but what sort of space separates two minds.
Exactly. He experienced loneliness only once, for about an hour, shortly after he arrived, and he was cured by sensing an infinite and unaccountable friendliness in nature. The pine needles, he says, swelled with sympathy and befriended him. It was this profound, immediate connection that replaced the need for human validation.
So if we want true company, he suggests we should be silent and physically far enough apart that our voices can't be heard.
So that our best parts, our thoughts, our highest selves can speak to each other when we do meet.
This internal focus naturally led him to develop extremely high standards for his intellectual life, especially reading. He treated reading like a heroic, almost physical pursuit.
He compared heroic books, like Homer's Iliad, which he carried with him, to nature itself. We might as well omit to study nature because she is old, he argues. The classics, he declares, are the noblest recorded thoughts of man.
Reading well for Thoreau is a noble intellectual exercise that requires the dedication of an athlete. Books must be read as deliberately and reservedly as they were written. This level of attention prevents that intellectual dissipation he critiques everywhere else.
And what does he critique? Easy reading. He describes the majority of readers who vegetate and dissipate their faculties on works like Tales of Zebulon and Sophronia or The Skip of the Tiptoe Hop.
It's mental junk food.
That's all it is, consuming bandwidth without providing any nourishment. He believes a single book can date a new era in a man's life. And the key for Thoreau is not to be a mere student or reader, but a seer.
A seer.
We must be forever on the alert, prioritizing looking always at what is to be seen.
And that perpetual alertness is what made his detailed observations of Walden Pond so legendary. He saw observation as a moral duty, a way to connect the external world to internal truths.
He went to extraordinary lengths, surveying the pond meticulously with a compass, a chain, a sounding line, specifically to challenge the prevailing local myth that the pond was bottomless.
He was proving that the things we think are mysteries are often just facts waiting for application and diligence.
He found it had a reasonably tight bottom at a not unreasonable, though at an unusual depth. He used science to find truth where others relied on superstition.
And the physical details he records are just beautiful. He describes the water's crystalline purity. A bather's body appears of an alabaster whiteness, producing a monstrous effect as the limbs are magnified and distorted.
He also studied the long fluctuation of the pond level, which could vary by 6 or 7 feet over the years. This fluctuation wasn't arbitrary, it served a purpose.
Right, it killed the shrubs and trees that encroached on the edges, leaving an unobstructed shore.
The pond, he says, asserts its title to a shore and licks its chaps from time to time. It's cleansing itself, a metaphor for constant self-renewal.
And speaking of cleansing, one of the most remarkable and overlooked observations comes during the spring thaw when he's describing the sand flow on the railroad cut. This is where he connects geology directly to human physiology.
This passage is just stunning. He describes the grotesque vegetation forms that the thawing sand and clay take on the railroad cut. They resemble leaves, coral, or crucially, brains or lungs. The sand flows, it branches out into 1,000 forms, illustrating a universal law of nature.
And he draws the physiological connection explicitly. He asks, what is man but a mass of thawing clay? The fingers and toes flow to their extent. He sees the same natural processes forming the earth as forming our bodies.
This elevates the simple observation of a railroad ditch into this profound statement about human potential and the universal connectivity of life. If we're attentive, every natural phenomenon reveals a law of our own being.
This kind of hyper-attentiveness also led to some truly dramatic passages about his brute neighbors. And the two most famous have to be The War of the Ants and The Chase of the Loon.
The War of the Ants is Thoreau at his most playful and epic. He witnessed this fierce, deadly battle between red and much larger black ants right on his woodpile.
And he immediately compared the carnage and patriotism to famous human battles. Austerlitz, Dresden, even the 2 men killed at the Concord fight.
It's almost absurd, isn't it? He gives this tiny, mundane insect battle the full gravity and rhetorical weight of a major human conflict. He even isolated 3 combatants under a tumbler just to observe them struggling locked together.
He noted the sheer ferocious determination. He describes one black warrior who had severed the heads of his enemies, which hung from his body like ghastly trophies at his saddlebow. He felt as if his feelings had been excited and harrowed by witnessing the struggle of a human battle before my door.
It confirms his point. If you live deliberately and look closely, the miniature contains the universal epic.
And then there's the loon chase, a perfect metaphor for the difficulty of pinning down elusive wild wisdom. He tried to pursue a loon on the pond, which responded with its wild laugh and betrayed itself.
The loon was a cunning adversary. It would dive and reappear where the water was whitest, always farthest from the boat, just mocking him with its laughter. It was a pretty game, played on the smooth surface of the pond, a man against a loon.
And the loon could swim faster underwater, sometimes passing directly beneath the boat. Thoreau felt that, like a fish, it knew its course as surely beneath the surface as on top.
It perfectly captures that frustration and eventual delight of trying to grasp an essential truth. It often dives away, only to reappear where you least expect it, laughing at your efforts.
The key takeaway from this section seems to be that the deep dive into nature is never passive. It is an act of intellectual vigilance. It demands the same kind of concentration he advocated for reading heroic books.
And all of Thoreau's observations, the failed investments of the farmers, the deceptive speed of the railroad, the integrity of the natural world, they all converge on one unavoidable motto.
Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity.
Exactly. He saw the chaos of his contemporaries as life frittered away by detail. He advises, let your affairs be as 2 or 3 and not 100 or 1,000. This simplicity isn't just minimalism, it's a radical restructuring of life's priorities to focus only on what is essential.
He saw this principle applying universally, from the personal to the national. The only cure for the chaos is a rigid economy, a stern and more than Spartan simplicity of life and elevation of purpose.
He saw the nation, just like a household, as an unwieldy and overgrown establishment, ruined by luxury and heedless expense, tripped up by its own traps, cluttered with furniture. It lives too fast and spends too much on things that don't matter.
This radical simplification, however, is just a means to an end. It's the prerequisite for the true exploration, the discovery of the inner continent.
He offers this potent philosophical critique of outward exploration, which was hugely fashionable in the mid-19th century. Why sail to chase the giraffe or find the source of the Nile? Why is Franklin the only man lost?
He poses that pointed question. Does Mr. Grinnell know where he himself is? The focus on external geography is a distraction from internal truth.
The true voyage, he argues, is internal. Be rather the Mungo Park, the Lewis and Clark and Frobisher of your own streams and oceans, explore your own higher latitudes.
He takes the great explorers of the age, figures associated with geographical or political expansion, and he turns their mission inward. We should seek internal sovereignty, not external dominion.
Every man, he says, is the lord of a realm beside which the earthly empire of the Tsar is but a petty state. This is the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean of one's being.
It's a powerful call for self-trust. The ultimate form of bravery is embarking on this voyage, exploring yourself. Only the defeated and deserters go to the external wars. The true heroes engage in the internal conflict.
And the highest goal, therefore, is simply to live truthfully, honestly, deliberately. If life proves to be mean, live it and know its meanness. If it's sublime, be able to give an account of it.
This focus on purity of purpose is so beautifully encapsulated by that anecdote of the artist of Kourou. This artist sought to make a staff that would be perfect in all respects, and he resolved to do nothing else in his life.
And because he made no compromise with time, time itself yielded to his purity of intention. As he searched for the perfect material and worked on the staff, centuries passed and the outside world cities became hoary ruins, dynasties fell, but the artist didn't grow older.
Why not?
Because his intention was timeless.
The moment he put the finishing stroke on his work, the staff expanded into a new, perfect world. The lesson is that the purity of his material and that unwavering focus on his art meant that the result had to be wonderful. For him, the former lapse of time was reversed, an illusion banished by sincere dedication.
It's the ultimate description of living deliberately. When you commit fully to the truth, the trivialities of the outside world, including the passing of time and the demands of society, they just cease to hold sway over you.
His final advice is truly universal. It just cuts through all the centuries that separate us from his work. However mean your life is, meet it and live it. Sell your clothes and keep your thoughts.
He says if you are confined by poverty and you can't buy books and newspapers, you are merely confined to the most significant and vital experiences. Life near the bone, he says, is where it is sweetest. He concludes with his definitive hierarchy of values. Rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth.
We took a deep look at his radical finances, his construction methods, his revolutionary ideas on consumption and technology, all of it leading back to that core idea of intellectual independence and living deliberately. Thoreau wasn't just writing a travelogue, he was handing us a blueprint for freedom.
And his lasting lesson is not to abandon society entirely, but to adopt a Spartan simplicity, a rigid inner discipline, to ensure we are living deliberately and not letting the unnecessary work of the world, St. Vitus's dance, he called it, that ceaseless nervous bustle, distract us from fundamental existence.
We have to question the counsel of those who have failed to find happiness and ensure we aren't being ridden by our own creations. Now, here's a provocative thought for you to take away. Thoreau compared the dead, dry life of society to an old table made of apple tree wood. And he recounted the story of a strong, beautiful bug that hatched out of that table after 60 years, from the egg deposited in the living tree many years before. The bug was heard gnawing its way out by the astonished family.
It's the perfect ending image. Thoreau suggests that the most vibrant, magnificent life might be dormant within the structures of society, just waiting for the right conditions, simplicity and truth, to break free. So if you embrace this idea of inner exploration, of being a Columbus to continents within you, living in harmony with fundamental laws, what kind of magnificent winged life, whose egg has been buried for ages under the concentric layers of dead, dry society, might unexpectedly come forth from you? Only that day dawns to which we are awake. There is more day to dawn.
Powerful words to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Walden. We promise the next exploration will be just as rigorous.